So, if you have been searching for Neville Goddard lectures and you know that his work has something really compelling, but it's also very complicated and convoluted in terms of like how to really interpret the lectures and what he was really saying, and like everyone out there has different interpretations and different ways that they ultimately put the teachings into practice, then you are going to love this series where I'm essentially just trying to simplify the Neville Goddard lectures for you and is distill down the key principles, the key concepts, so that you can manifest anything in any area of your life with greater ease and speed and consistency. And that's important because when you don't have the ease, right? When you feel like you're forcing it and resisting it, and when you feel like you don't have the speed, when things are stalling or you're avoiding it or you're procrastinating or you're feeling like, it's just not happening, right, with as much ease and there's just a lot of friction and consistency, right? Like when it works sometimes and it doesn't other times, a lot of people start to turn to people like Neville Goddard and Abraham Hicks, etc. So in this particular series, we're going to dive deep into Neville's work because there are a lot of concepts that you can draw from that will absolutely take your manifestation game to the next level. So in this particular video, we're going to dive into the law of assumption so that you can really understand like what was meant by assumption. And here is the key distinction with the law of assumption, right? You just know that the sun was going to rise. You assume that people will call you by your name. You assume that drink water, you're going to ultimately want to go to the toilet. You assume that if you eat, you're going to feel full. You assume that if you go out into the sun, it's going to feel warm. You assume that if you dive into a swimming pool, you're going to feel refreshed and you're going to feel water on your body. You assume these things as though they are just normal. You're not expecting them. You're not visualizing them. You're not affirming them. You're just assuming that just is the way it is, which is very similar to how your self-concept operates with you without you even knowing, right? It just happens the way it happens. It just expects and assumes that things are going to happen for it, to it, because of it, etc., without you knowing. So with the law of assumption, right, Neville always says that we manifest who we are being. We don't manifest what we essentially want. So wanting something, right, we can want and we can say our affirmations and do visualizations and try and manifest the thing that we want all day long until we blue in the face. But ultimately, what gets created ultimately is who we are being, right? Who we think we are. And that self-concept was formed pre-verbal, in utero, and largely unconsciously. So when it comes to the law of assumption, the fastest way to see what you assume about life, about yourself, about other people, about your success, etc., is what your reality or your current environment is reflecting back to you. Because your life reflects what you assume is true about yourself and others and relationships and money and the world, etc., etc., etc. But if your self-concept is programmed to operate and to function and to assume, right, that things are hard, things take long, things don't ever work out for you, you repeat the same patterns, then obviously you're going to experience that, and that I am successful belief or assumption is never going to necessarily land or get reprogrammed because it's not at a high enough leverage point of change. I talk a lot about the leverage points of change in my work. And a higher leverage point of change than belief is your values, what you think are important. And what drives your values are your identities. And your identities are essentially make up your self-concept, who you think you are. And the law of assumption is essentially derived from what your self-concept believes and assumes, right, to be true and to be familiar, because ultimately that's what feeds back and reflects that you're going to be safe, you're going to be comfortable, and it reflects that truth back to whatever you assume about that thing. So that's why, two people can, for example, apply for a job and the same job, launch the same offer into a similar relationship, and they can get completely different results. And it's not because one is luckier or more skilled or more lovable or more beautiful than the other, but rather because one assumes, right, that things are going to work out, and the other one assumes that things are difficult or that they have to work harder or that they are not as lovable or that they always have difficult relationships or whatever. Insert your assumption. Yeah, and then you get that reflection back to you in the situations, relationships, and experiences that you find yourself in. And the thing you have to realize is that expectation, that assumption that you are operating from is largely unconscious. And this is where a lot of people misunderstand Neville and this whole law of assumption. They think that assumption is something that you have to, that you have to assume it. You have to create your assumptions and that you have to force these assumptions into the world. When in actual fact, assumption is what your self-concept already believes to be true, already expects to happen, right? So it's like even beyond a belief, because a belief is just a thought that you continuously think repeatedly that ultimately then becomes like, okay, well, I just believe this to be true. But if it's, if you remember that your belief is associated and driven by a value, something that you think is important, And what you think is important is usually driven by and is operated by in a particular identity of yours that holds that value as true and that therefore believes. So for example, if you have the identity of being a vegan, some of the values that would be associated with being a vegan, right, would be like animal cruelty and being healthy and not like having a lighter footprint on the planet, etc. So then you would believe that eating meat is wrong. And then those beliefs about what's right and wrong inform what you are capable of, right? So you might be literally able-bodied to pick up a knife and a fork and eat a piece of steak, but you might not be willing to use that capability and that skill set that you have about like how to, prepare food or cook a particular, recipe, because it's driven by the belief, right? Which is driven by the value, which is driven by the identity and the whole self-concept of being a vegan. And so then if you're not willing to do that, that then might result in either the behavior of you choosing to cook something that's vegan or to not take an action, right? So there's either going to be an action or an inaction that happens. And so when you think about the things that you're doing or not doing, and you're, judging yourself because you're not taking action for, to get a particular result in your life, and you don't have that resulting experience or reality, you've got to find the higher leverage point of change that is ultimately operating at that level of assumption that then drives and cascades all of that energy down into ultimately the resulting reality that you find yourself in. So when you are trying to manifest, right, you're trying to take energy from its infinite state and you're trying to then pull it into three-dimensional form. These are the energetics that I often talk about in my Aligned Living Collective, where I teach you how to access the energetics so that you can understand the things like your thoughts, your emotions, your assumptions, your beliefs, your values, your skills and capabilities, and all the things that are ultimately driving and informing your behavior, right? And the actions or inactions, right? The actions that you take or don't take that then result in the environment that you find yourself in. And this is why this is such a key point. This is why effort does not override assumption, right? So if you are not aware of what your self-concept is and what your identities are and what those assumptions, what the corresponding assumptions and worldviews are, points of views ultimately, right, that are driving or that are being cascaded down through your neurology into your behavior, etc. This is why, you can work hard, you can visualize daily, you can say your affirmations and try and do all the right things, but still snap back into the same repeating patterns. Because ultimately what hasn't updated is your internal self-concept, your internal sense of self, worldview of like what is true for you. And here's the thing, is like what is essentially true for you lives even higher above your identities and your self-concept, because your self-concept is largely made up of identities. We all have multiple identities that we operate from at any one particular point in time. And our soul state is actually a higher leverage point of change than your self-concept and your identities. And even above that is the source of inspiration and source of energy, right? Which is informing and ultimately guiding and inspiring everything. And so when you start to understand from a quantum physics point of view, right, not from a Neville Goddard point of view, you really start to tune in, tap in, and turn on your soul state, which is informed by source energy, which is ultimately where you can tap into the infinite potentialities and possibilities that exist for you, and where there is no judgment. There is no right, wrong, good, bad, better, worse, vegan, carnivore, keto, this, that, right? It's just you are tuned in, tapped into source, infinite possibility, infinite potentiality, and you can be, do, and have literally anything that you desire with ease and speed and consistency, especially when you release everything, like all the obstacles, all the limiting assumptions and beliefs and values and conflicting identities and self-concept. All of that is essentially what stands in the way, which not a lot of people talk about when it comes to Neville Goddard. So really the key is to start to become aware of your self-concept, of all of the different identities that you operate from and what they assume, right? What they ultimately, and it's again, it's like it's more than just like a belief, because these are so ingrained in you that it's not even like you can often consciously be like, well, I believe this, right? You really have to dive deep into self-awareness. And so this is where I bring in my work, which is called Energy Intelligence, where I teach you how to access the energetics, because energy is ultimately everything that is informing your identities, your self-concept, your assumptions, your beliefs, your values, etc. Right? And so when you get to the energetic root, when you can, what I call access the energetics and identify like the highest leverage points of change, then that energy can cascade down, right, through all the different, essentially like organizational levels, right, from assumption all the way down to three-dimensional matter and physical reality. And that's when you can manifest with greater ease and speed and consistency. Questions that you could possibly ask yourself to help you have this self-awareness is like, what am I assuming about myself right now? Am I assuming that this is going to be hard? Am I assuming that this, is that it's my fault or it's harder than it should be? Am I assuming that I'm making it hard? Am I assuming that it's never going to work out for me? Am I assuming that things never go according to plan? Am I assuming that it is going to work out? Am I assuming that I'm going to have to make sacrifices that I'm not willing to, right? Like all of these things you can start to untangle yourself. It just takes a bit of conscious awareness. So if you're enjoying this type of content where I simplify the Neville Goddard lectures, then make sure that you subscribe and like this video just so that it helps my channel grow, and hit the notification bell so that you are notified when the next video lands. Leave a comment down below if you felt this was helpful and this simplified things for you, and I'll see you in the next one soon.